Comrades, hear me now. The world you inhabit, the gilded towers, the glittering streets, the opulent salons of the few, is built upon the sweat, the labour and the suffering of the many. Comfort, you've been told, is the highest good, ease the measure of progress. Yet what is comfort, if not the opiate of the oppressed? What is ease, if it blinds the labouring masses to the chains that bind them? The future, I say, does not arise from comfort. It is forged in the crucible of conflict, in the storm of struggle, in the relentless motion of those who refuse to bow before exploitation. Look around you. The capitalists sit fat, drunk with profit, their wealth growing from the labour they neither perform nor appreciate. The workers, tailors, miners, factory hands, clerks, produce not for their own flourishing, but for the insatiable appetite of the bourgeoisie. Each hour of labour, each drop of sweat, is measured and converted into the wealth of the few, while the many remain dispossessed. This is not accident, it is system, it is the law of capital. And yet, the ruling class whispers a lie, that submission ensures safety, that patience ensures reward, that comfort is the path to happiness. They fear you, not because you are strong, but because you are powerful when united. They fear the awakening of the working class because they know that history belongs not to the idle, but to those who rise in struggle, who break the chains, who demand justice. Comrades, history is not a gentle stream. It is a river of conflict. The revolutions of the past, the upheavals that shook kings from their thrones, did not emerge from the complacency of the privileged. They erupted from the fury of the oppressed. Every advance in freedom, every extension of rights, every step toward human emancipation has been won through struggle, through confrontation, through the courage of those who refuse to be silenced. Capitalism tells us to compete, to envy, to claw for crumbs, to accept scarcity as a natural order. But we know better. Scarcity is a tool wielded by the few to control the many. The worker is made to see his neighbour as rival, the poor as enemy of the poor, and the oppressed as perpetually divided. This division is the lifeblood of tyranny. Unity, therefore, is our weapon. Let the working class awaken to its own power. Let the oppressed recognize their strength not in isolation, but in solidarity. We must organize. We must demand. We must seize what is rightfully ours, not as criminals, but as rightful inheritors of the fruits of our labor. Let no comfort seduce you into submission. Let no promise of ease dull your revolutionary instinct. The future will not emerge from the gilded salons of the idle, nor from the indulgence of the few. It will emerge from the factories, the fields, the streets, the laboratories, the homes of the workers who rise together against injustice. Comrades, do not seek comfort in false security. Seek power in struggle. Do not wait for permission to be free. Claim it. The oppressors will not yield. They cannot. Their profits are chained to your labor. Their dominion rests upon your acquiescence. Only when the working class unites, only when the oppressed rise in consciousness and action, will the edifice of exploitation crumble. The future belongs to those who dare to confront it, not those who retreat into ease. History favors the restless, the unyielding, the insurgent. Today, you are called to the barricades of thought and action, to the assembly halls of solidarity, to the streets of justice. Unite, organize, struggle. The chains that bind you are not eternal. The oppression that crushes you is not destiny. From conflict, from confrontation, from the fire of struggle emerges freedom. From the unity of the oppressed emerges a new society, one of equality, one of justice, one of humanity unshackled from the tyranny of capital. Let the bourgeois tremble, let the idle tremble, let history know that the working class will not wait. The future emerges from conflict, not comfort, and that future is ours to forge. Workers of the world, rise. Comfort in the world as it is structured today is not the natural reward of labor or the just outcome of human effort. It is a tool wielded by the ruling class to pacify, to numb, and to control. Those who possess the wealth, the means of production, and the power understand deeply the seductive danger of ease. It lulls the working masses into a state of acquiescence, creating an illusion that life is bearable without questioning the structures that govern it. To offer comfort is to distract from injustice, to cloak the chains of exploitation in the soft fabric of temporary reprieve. The wages, the small privileges, the fleeting pleasures granted to the laborer are not gifts of freedom. They are instruments of control designed to make the oppressed tolerate the intolerable by giving just enough to survive comfortably. The powerful ensure that the workers do not look beyond the immediate, that they do not perceive the system that extracts their labor, their creativity, and their lives for the enrichment of a few. The opiate of comfort is potent precisely because it is subtle. It does not bind with iron, nor does it impose with force. It entices with illusion, and the worker, believing that ease is within reach, ceases to fight. It is a slow anesthetic that dulls consciousness, blunts the instinct for revolt, and transforms potential insurgents into passive participants in their own subjugation. True change, in contrast, cannot emerge from this state of comfort. It is not born in salons or in the warm embrace of complacency, but in the fire of struggle, in the clash between oppression and resistance, in the tension between those who take and those who produce. Change demands recognition of injustice, the conscious awareness that one's labor is exploited and one's existence commodified. It requires the mind to awaken, the spirit to refuse submission, and the body to move, organize, and confront the structures of exploitation. Struggle is the engine of history because it forces awareness, compels action, and transforms the isolated grievances of the many into a collective force capable of reshaping society. In struggle, the worker learns the truth of their condition, that the wealth they create is not theirs, that the comfort promised is conditional, and that the only path to liberation is through effort, resistance, and solidarity. Struggle reveals the mechanisms of domination hidden beneath the surface of apparent ease, exposing the contradictions of a system that offers comfort to said. 8. Rather than to empower, the opiate of comfort is particularly effective because it appeals to basic human desire, the desire to live without pain, to have security, to experience fleeting pleasure amidst hardship. The ruling class exploits these desires with precision by ensuring that workers are never completely destitute, that they are able to consume within limits, and that small concessions are offered periodically. The system prevents the development of revolutionary consciousness. The mind becomes preoccupied with survival in the immediate term, with minor satisfactions that obscure the larger truth, and the instinct for systemic change is delayed or derailed. Yet history demonstrates repeatedly that it is not comfort that catalyzes progress, but conflict. The liberation of peoples, the advancement of social justice, and the emancipation of the oppressed have all emerged from the refusal to accept imposed ease, from the willingness to endure hardship in the pursuit of a higher collective purpose. The struggle itself educates, empowers, and unites. It transforms private suffering into public awareness and personal indignation into communal action. Without struggle, the illusions of comfort persist indefinitely, and the oppressed remain trapped within a cycle of dependence and submission. Labor becomes a commodity, human creativity a tool of enrichment for others, and the promise of a better life is deferred indefinitely. But in the crucible of conflict, the worker discovers power, agency, and solidarity. It is in confronting adversity that consciousness is sharpened and that the seeds of collective action are sown. True change requires endurance, critical reflection, and organized resistance. Critical reflection and organized resistance. It demands that the oppressed recognize their shared interests, confront division, and act together to dismantle the structures that enforce inequality. Every strike, every protest, every act of defiance is a rejection of the seduction of comfort and a declaration that human worth is not measured by endurance under imposed ease, but by the courage to challenge the systems that perpetuate injustice. Comfort may soothe, but it cannot liberate. It may satisfy temporarily, but it cannot empower. Only through struggle does the oppressed gain knowledge of their condition, strength in unity, and vision for a future not defined by servitude but by emancipation. The laborer who endures hardship in pursuit of justice, who confronts oppression instead of submitting to ease, becomes an agent of history, an architect of change, and a bearer of a society that values human life over profit, cooperation over competition, and freedom over imposed tranquility. Capitalism is not merely an economic system. It is a mechanism of domination, a structure deliberately structured to extract labor and channel the wealth of the many into the coffers of the few. It thrives on inequality, not by accident, but by design. The laborer, the artisan, the farmer, the factory worker produces the goods, the services, the innovations upon which society depends, yet the benefits of their toil are appropriated by those who own the instruments of production, the factories, the machines, and the capital itself. Every hour of labor, every ounce of skill, every act of diligence and creativity is converted into profit, not for the one who labors, but for the one who commands. This is the essence of exploitation, the subordination of human effort to the accumulation of wealth in the hands of a minority. The worker is paid less than the value they create. The surplus is seized by the capitalist, who neither labors nor risks as the worker does. This relationship is not natural, it is systemic. It is enforced through laws, social conventions, and the ideology that disguises exploitation as merit, that justifies inequality as inevitable, and that convinces the many to accept conditions that serve only the few. The capitalist system is therefore a structure of power, and within this structure, the few who own and control dominate the many who labor, while society at large internalizes the illusion that this arrangement is just or inevitable. The worker, however, is powerless. The true power of those who labor resides not in the solitary struggle of the individual, but in the collective strength of the united masses. Division is the instrument of oppression. Capitalism perpetuates rivalry among workers, encouraging them to see one another as competitors for scarce resources, rather than allies in the struggle against exploitation. It instills fear, fosters mistrust, and seduces individuals with the promise that they may ascend while others remain in servitude. Yet history has proven that no individual can wrest control from the systemic mechanisms of capital alone. It is only through unity that the working class can confront and dismantle the structures that exploit them. When workers recognize their shared condition, their common interests, and their collective potential, they become a force capable of demanding justice, reclaiming their labor's value and reshaping society. Solidarity transforms fragmented suffering into organized power, turning passive endurance into active resistance. The capitalist may attempt to fragment, to placate, or to intimidate, but unity among workers disrupts their control. Strikes, protests, and movements are the manifestations of collective consciousness. They reveal the latent power of those who produce wealth to demand equity. When workers act together, their power is not merely symbolic, it is practical. Immediate and formidable, factories can cease production, goods can be withheld, and the flow of capital can be interrupted, revealing that the wealth of the few is dependent upon the labor of the many. It is this interdependence that is often obscured by ideology, by rhetoric that glorifies individual success while vilifying collective action. The truth is undeniable. The accumulation of wealth by the few is inseparable from the subjugation of the many, and therefore the liberation of the oppressed lies in solidarity, in the conscious recognition of shared interest, and in coordinated action to reclaim what has been stolen by systemic exploitation. The strength of unity extends beyond material leverage. It cultivates consciousness, awareness, and resilience. The isolated worker may feel powerless, vulnerable, and resigned, but the organized worker understands the mechanisms of domination, perceives the possibilities for resistance, and gains courage through collective support. Unity is education and empowerment. It transforms fear into strategy, isolation into alliance, and exploitation into a target for reform or revolution. The worker who stands alone may be broken by the system, but the worker who stands with others becomes part of an unstoppable force, capable of reshaping production, redistributing wealth, and reconfiguring the social order. Capitalism relies on Obed. Iensens on the illusion that the individual is insignificant and on the belief that wealth naturally flows to the deserving. It hides the truth that exploitation is systemic, not personal, and that the survival of the capitalist depends entirely upon the labor of the many. Recognizing this truth is the first step toward liberation, and acting upon it through collective organization is the decisive step toward transforming society. The unity of workers is not a mere moral imperative or abstract principle. It is a practical necessity, the most potent instrument available to challenge the concentrated power of capital. Through solidarity, the exploited discover their strength, confront the structures of domination, and assert their right to the wealth and conditions they themselves create. History is not a gentle river flowing towards some predetermined destiny. It is a storm, a relentless current shaped by struggle, by confrontation, shaped by struggle, by confrontation, and by the irrepressible tension between those who hold power and those who labor under it. Complacency, the passive acceptance of injustice, has never transformed society. It is the illusion of stability, the seductive comfort that convinces the oppressed to endure their condition and the privilege to maintain their dominion unchallenged. Those who sit in ease, those who rest upon inherited wealth or unearned privilege, rarely alter the course of human events. They are observers, beneficiaries, or victims of history, but never its architects. Change, advancement, and liberation emerge only when individuals recognize the contradictions within their world and act upon them with determination and unity. The past is filled with the evidence of this truth. Revolutions, uprisings, labor strikes, and movements for justice have never been sparked by satisfaction or quietude, but by the urgency of oppression, the fury of inequity, and the courage of those who refuse to accept the status quo. The ruling classes, aware of this fundamental principle, dedicate immense effort to cultivating complacency among the masses. They offer diversions, fleeting comforts, and illusions of progress, all designed to prevent awareness and to suppress the drive toward change. The worker is told that the system is just, that suffering is inevitable, that patience will yield reward, and that dissent is dangerous or futile. Education, religion, entertainment, and culture are often enlisted to reinforce this narrative, shaping perception to favor acceptance rather than action. Complacency is not an absence of struggle because the oppressed are weak or incapable. It is manufactured by design, a tool to protect entrenched power and to ensure that wealth and authority remain concentrated in the hands of a few. The illusion of stability is therefore the mugu, saint powerful weapon of domination, for it masks the structural contradictions of society while neutralizing the potential energy of collective action. Yet history shows repeatedly that these efforts at pacification ultimately fail. When exploitation, oppression, and injustice reach intolerable levels, when the gap between the few who hoard wealth and the many who labor widens beyond endurance, conflict erupts. It is then that the forces of history reveal themselves in their rawest form. Strikes, protests, revolutions, rebellions, and social movements emerge as the true catalysts of change. These conflicts, though often violent, chaotic, and uncertain, are the mechanisms through which societies advance, adapt, and transform. They expose the contradictions of power, they challenge entrenched hierarchies, and they illuminate the potential for a world organized not for profit, but for human flourishing. It is through confrontation that the oppressed recognize their collective strength, articulate their demands, and disrupt the systems that exploit them. Complacency, in contrast, preserves inequality, perpetuates suffering, and ensures that history remains in the hands of those already in control. The working class, the peasantry, and all oppressed peoples have historically been the engines of conflict that drive historical change. When they organize, when they refuse to accept exploitation, when they act with solidarity, they force the hand of society and the powerful alike. Labor movements have reshaped economies, revolutions have overthrown tyrannies, and social movements have redefined justice and rights. None of these transformations occurred because the masses were comfortable or content. They occurred because the oppressed recognized the injustice of their conditions and acted decisively to challenge it. In this sense, conflict is not merely an external confrontation, it is a process of consciousness, an awakening that transforms perception into strategy, indignation into action, and suffering into the impetus for liberation. Complacency allows inequality to persist unnoticed. It permits exploitation to flourish unopposed, and it delays the awakening of collective consciousness. It convinces the worker that survival is sufficient, that endurance is virtue, and that the status quo is immutable. Conflict, in contrast, sharpens awareness. It forces questions, provokes analysis, and illuminates the mechanisms of domination. Through struggle, individuals and communities discover their power, their shared interests, and the pathways toward liberation. Confrontation creates historical momentum because it transforms isolated grievance into collective action, personal suffering into social critique, and the latent energy of the oppressed into tangible force, capable of altering society. Every major transformation in human history, from the revolutions of the oppressed against monarchies to the struggles of labor against industrial exploitation, demonstrates that comfort does not produce change. The powerful do not yield without pressure. Privileges do not dissolve without challenge. And injustice does not dissolve without challenge, and injustice does not vanish through acceptance. History is animated by those who refuse to remain passive, by those who organize in defiance, by those who act with courage against entrenched systems. Complacency may appear safe, but it is sterile. Conflict, however, is productive, generative, and indispensable, for it lays the foundation upon which freedom, justice, and equality are built. Solidarity among the oppressed is not a mere sentiment or moral aspiration. It is the essential instrument through which those who labor, those who toil without reward, and those who suffer under systemic injustice can confront the structures that exploit them. Division is the cornerstone of oppression, the mechanism by which the few maintain control over the many. When workers are pitted against one another, when peasants distrust artisans, when the impoverished are made to envy the slightly better off, the system of exploitation flourishes without opposition. The ruling class understands this well, for they know that isolated individuals are powerless, that fragmented communities can be manipulated, and that fear and suspicion are more effective tools of control than brute force alone. By fostering division, the oppressors prevent collective consciousness, suppress rebellion, and ensure that the wealth and power accumulated through the labor of the many remain concentrated in the hands of the few. Solidarity is the antidote to this deliberate fragmentation. It transforms isolated suffering into collective recognition, individual frustration into organized resistance, and scattered discontent into a force capable of challenging tyranny. When the oppressed unite, they awaken to the reality that their struggles are not personal misfortunes, but systemic consequences of exploitation. The laborer begins to see the peasant. The factory worker recognizes the miner, and the oppressed in every sector perceives the commonality of their conditions. This recognition is the first step toward empowerment, for understanding shared oppression reveals shared potential. The oppressed realize that their individual limitations are not permanent constraints, but are imposed externally, that their subjugation is maintained not by their weakness but by their disunity, and that the key to liberation lies in mutual support and collective action. The ruling class seeks to obscure this truth by promoting competition, instilling fear, and creating false hierarchy. Big business among those who are otherwise equals in their exploitation. They encourage the worker to see a neighbor as a rival, to measure their worth by comparison rather than by justice, and to accept subordination as natural. They exploit differences in race, gender, ethnicity, skill, and circumstance to fabricate division, knowing that fragmented communities cannot rise together. Solidarity, therefore, is revolutionary not because it is sentimental, but because it dismantles the mechanisms of oppression. When the oppressed stand together, the structures built to isolate and subjugate them begin to crumble. Strikes, collective bargaining, protests, and organized movements are tangible expressions of solidarity, demonstrating the capacity of united action to disrupt the concentration of power, redistribute influence, and challenge inequality. Moreover, solidarity is not limited to shared material conditions. It is a conscious, ethical, and political choice to recognize one another as comrades, collaborators, and partners in the struggle for justice. It requires overcoming ingrained divisions, rejecting the narratives of competition and enmity imposed by the ruling class, and fostering a culture of mutual support. Solidarity teaches that the victory of one is the victory of all, that oppression of one is oppression of all, and that liberation is inseparable from collective action. In his way, solidarity functions as both a shield and a sword. It protects the vulnerable from isolation and despair, while simultaneously enabling the oppressed to strike at the roots of tyranny with coordinated strength. Throughout history, every meaningful transformation, every extension of freedom, and every advance in justice has been made possible by the recognition of common struggle. Revolutions do not succeed when factions act alone. Labor movements do not achieve reforms through isolated effort. It is the unity of those marginalized, exploited, and silenced that forces entrenched powers to negotiate, to concede, and in some cases, to fall. The oppressed, once unified, wield a power that is unassailable by mere wealth or privilege. Factories can halt production, governments can be pressured, and systemic hierarchies can be dismantled when solidarity channels collective energy into organized, purposeful action. Solidarity is also a means of cultivating consciousness. By connecting with others who share similar conditions, the oppressed develop understanding, empathy, and strategic insight. The experiences of one worker inform the struggles of another. The victories of one community inspire courage in another, and the knowledge gained collectively strengthens the capacity for coordinated action. In this way, solidarity amplifies both power and understanding, ensuring that the oppressed are not only numerous but also conscious of the structures they face and capable of acting with intelligence and purpose against them. The weapon of solidarity is thus indispensable. Division can enslave, isolate, and paralyze. Unity liberates, empowers, and mobilizes. When the oppressed recognize their shared strength and act together, they transform vulnerability into resilience, frustration into strategy, and subjugation into a force capable of confronting and dismantling tyranny. Solidarity ensures that no individual stands alone against exploitation, that collective awareness supplants manipulation, and that the unity of the many can challenge the domination of the few. The future is not granted, it is seized. It is not an inheritance of passivity, nor a reward for patience. It is the product of action, consciousness, and collective determination. Those who wait, who accept the injustices imposed upon them, who remain complacent in the face of exploitation, will find that the future is shaped entirely by the few who hold power, wealth, and influence. The oppressed cannot rely on the promises of the ruling class, for those who benefit from inequality have no interest in its dissolution. The structures that sustain dominance, economic, political, cultural, and social, are maintained precisely because those in control are vigilant, organized, and unyielding. Therefore, to claim the future, to shape it in accordance with justice and equality, one must rise. To rise is to awaken from the lethargy imposed by exploitation, to recognize the systemic forces that bind one to subordination, and to reject the notion that one's life and labor are the property of another. Rising is not merely a symbolic gesture. It is the initiation of consciousness, the refusal to accept that oppression is natural or eternal, and the first step toward collective empowerment. Rising alone, however, is insufficient. Individual acts of defiance, while important in sparking awareness, cannot dismantle the vast networks of power that perpetuate inequality. Organization is essential to organize is to connect individual awakening to collective strength, to transform scattered indignation into coordinated action, and to channel the energy of the oppressed into movements capable of challenging entrenched hierarchies. Organization transforms vulnerability into resilience, ensures that the weak are supported by the strong, and provides strategic direction to the frustrations and demands of the many. In a society where wealth and power are concentrated, where exploitation is systemic, and where oppression is normalized, only coordinated action can confront the structures of domination effectively. Whether in labor unions, political movements, community alliances, or revolutionary committees, organization allows the oppressed to pool resources, share knowledge, and assert their collective will with force and clarity. It ensures that the voices of the many cannot be ignored, that the labor of the countless cannot be appropriated without challenge, and that injustice, once confronted in unity, becomes vulnerable to transformation. Confronting injustice is the defining act that links rising and organizing to the creation of a new future. Injustice is pervasive, systemic, and often invisible to those who benefit from it, yet it is experienced daily by those whose labor, bodies, and lives are exploited. To confront injustice is to recognize it clearly, to name T for what it is, and to act against it with determination and courage. Confrontation is not passive, it is active, persistent, and unwavering. It requires the oppressed to challenge the structures that deny them their rights, to resist the ideologies that normalize inequality, and to demand that society be reorganized around principles of fairness, equality, and human dignity. Confrontation also requires moral clarity and strategic insight, for the forces of oppression are powerful, adaptive, and relentless. To confront injustice is to place the collective will of the oppressed against the concentrated power of the few, to reveal the contradictions of the system, and to assert that a world built on exploitation is neither natural nor unchangeable. The future belongs to those who embody all three, those who rise, who refuse to accept subjugation, those who organize, who transform individual awareness into collective strength, and those who confront injustice, who refuse to tolerate systems of oppression and act decisively to dismantle them. It belongs to those who do not allow fear, comfort, or division to paralyze them, but instead recognize that the destiny of the many is in their own hands. This future is not abstract or distant. It is forged in the actions taken today, in the solidarity built among the oppressed, and in the relentless pursuit of a society where human worth is not measured by productivity or wealth, but by dignity, freedom, and equality. The ruling class will resist. It will attempt to divide, distract, and demoralize those who rise. It will offer illusions of compromise, fleeting concessions, and false promises of inclusion to weaken the unity and resolve of the oppressed. Yet history demonstrates that true change has never been granted by those in power. It has always been seized by the courageous, organized, and resolute. Those who rise, organize, and confront injustice rewrite the rules, redefine rights, and reshape society in accordance with collective interest rather than individual profit. The future is their arena, their responsibility, and their reward, and it cannot be taken lightly, delayed, or surrendered to complacency, for every moment of inaction strengthens the grip of oppression and prolongs the suffering of the many. Comrades, the threads of struggle, unity, awareness, and action are not separate. They are the lifeblood of our collective liberation. Comfort has deceived us, division has weakened us, and complacency has delayed the dawn of justice, but now we stand at the precipice of possibility. The chains of exploitation forged by those who profit from our labour are not eternal. They are meant to be broken, and they will be broken not by the timid, not by the passive, but by those who rise, who recognize their shared strength, and who act together with courage and clarity. The future is not a gift to be received. It is a prize to be claimed through struggle, through solidarity, through organized confrontation against every form of tyranny. History has never been shaped by ease or submission. It has always been written by the bold, the united, the relentless. Every act of resistance, every strike, every voice raised in defiance, every hand extended in solidarity contributes to the transformation of society. The oppressed, when they stand together, possess a power that cannot be denied, a force that cannot be ignored, and a vision that cannot be silenced. Our labour, our intellect, our courage, and our unity are the instruments with which the foundations of oppression will crumble. The future belongs not to the few who hoard wealth and privilege, but to the many who dare to confront injustice, who refuse to accept division, and who claim the destiny of humanity as their own. Rise, organize, struggle, and let the world bear witness. The era of complacency is over. The era of collective action, of revolutionary consciousness, and of true justice has begun. The oppressed are no longer passive. They are awake, united, and unstoppable. From the fires of conflict and the strength of solidarity, a new society will emerge, one where exploitation is vanquished, equality is realized, and the labor of the many finally serves the flourishing of all. Comrades, the time is now, and the power has always been ours.